Good morning. I'm Dean Hammond, Interim Dean for the Business School, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you today to our semi-annual Distinguished Speaker Series sponsored by the Center for Leadership Studies, or CLS. We look forward to hearing from today's distinguished speaker, Mr. Robert Adolph. Bert, go ahead. First, allow me to extend a special welcome to our St. Peter's University Leadership Fellows, as well as all of our students, administrators, and faculty joining us today. Thank you. We have a truly distinguished speaker for today's speaker event, Mr. Robert Bruce Adolph. He possesses nearly a half-century of experience in senior leadership, posts at the United Nations and the United States Army. He has extensive experience with leadership, whom you will be introduced to in a few moments, by our new director of the CLS, Dr. Samar Isa. Before turning over the podium to Samar, I want to remind our audience of the purpose of the speaker series, which is a key component of our Center for Leadership Studies. The Distinguished Speaker Series is designed to bring leaders in business, military, law enforcement, sports, healthcare, government, and other professions to our campus and to engage with our university community. Provide a vehicle for research and thought leadership. Provide inspiration and examples of leadership for our SPU community that align with our Jesuit mission. In addition, the Center, through the Fellows Program, seeks to mold leaders who understand their strengths, weaknesses, and values, are confident in their ability to innovate and embrace change, can lead with caring compassion, and are committed to unlocking the potential of their followers and energize themselves and others through courageous ambitions. We are so honored and pleased to have such a leader here today who truly embodies these values and inspires others to action. And now I'd like to turn it over to Samar, Dr. Isa, to add her own words of welcome and introduce our distinguished speaker. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm happy to welcome you all to our distinguished speaker today, organized by our Center for Leadership Studies. I will ask our leadership fellows to stand, please. Thank you, guys. So a very special welcome to our distinguished guest, Mr. Adolph, a dear friend of mine and my former manager at the UN. Robert Adolph possesses nearly a half-century of experience in senior leadership posts as a military officer in the U.S. Army Special Forces and military intelligence. He commanded 4 different units in both the U.S. and overseas. Because of his articles on leadership and was still in uniform, at the grade of major, he was selected as a reviewer by the U.S. Army War College for their draft senior leadership manual for colonels and generals. His analysis of that effort was subsequently published as well. He also served in senior roles at the United Nations peacekeeping in 5 different countries, crisis countries like he mentioned. After retiring from active military service, he joined the United Nations full-time as a security chief, subsequently performing difficult, demanding, and sometimes even dangerous service in Sierra Leone, Yemen, Iraq, Ethiopia, Egypt, Palestine/Israel, Indonesia, and as chief of the Middle East and North Africa Division at UN headquarters in New York City during the Arab Spring, where I personally met Bob. So before I turn it over to Bob, I would like to just say some personal words. Today that we're speaking about leadership, and also I would like to mention that he is really a great publisher. So he wrote the well-reviewed book entitled Surviving the United Nations, and then became a frequent guest commentator for the multiple Pulitzer Prize-winning Tampa Bay Times, Holland's Atlantic Perspective magazine, the U.S. Military Times, and more. He holds graduate degrees in international affairs and national security studies. Today, he is an international speaker on various topics, including leadership. He is currently working on his 2nd book, and 3rd and 4th as well. Before, I just want to say a quick thing, that when I worked with Bob for over a decade ago, he was really a special leader, an influential one. And I want to quote something that he told me or taught me back then, and he said, a true leader is someone who would demonstrably care about his team. and not only care, but demonstrably care. So he has to show what kind of care. And I can just comment to that, and I can say that Bob took us to, for lunch. He took us to lunch on our birthdays. He got us gifts every time he traveled. He chatted with us about our personal goals and pushed us forward. He didn't make us work very, very hard, that's for sure. But that was one of the things that made us tougher. And I'm personally very, very honored to have Bob here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time to come to New Jersey just to speak to our students. And without further ado, all yours. Thank you.
Okay, where's the next one? Here we go. All right, let's give this a shot. Can everybody make out my voice all right? Okay, no problems. Glad to hear it. I wrote this presentation just for this group. I started in Cancun, Mexico about 3 months ago. And I sent it to Summer a couple of weeks ago to take a look at it so that it was consistent with the teaching that was going on here at St. Peter's. And of course, if there's any disagreement, I want to hear it before the presentation. So we want to make sure that we are aligned. You'll note that the title, Leadership and Management, I chose this in particular for this group. How many of you are business majors? Okay, this is predominantly, although the principles underlying leadership are all the same. It's particularly difficult in business, and we need to talk about that a little bit. And I'm going to talk about thread the needle. Now, we all know, we've all had bad bosses, we've all had good bosses, okay? I was in Ukraine last year for the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. This usually gets a laugh, okay? You guys are entirely too serious, lighten up. I was walking down the street in Kyiv in Ukraine during the war, okay? Every night we were getting missiles coming in and all the alarm bells would go off. And I saw this guy on the street corner. This is how the Ukrainians felt about Russian leadership. Yes, sir? Is that?
Yes, it is. He's asking if this is toilet paper.
Yes, it's toilet paper. Oh, you got it. Okay. So, we all know about bad leaders. Today, we're going to talk about good leaders. What makes me an expert? Well, whatever expertise I possess was because I made mistakes. I was repetitively placed in leadership positions in the Army and then later in the United Nations. I made errors of judgment time and time again, based in ego, based in vanity. We all suffer from these things. However, the road to wisdom is based in failure. And if you're willing to stand up and look your failures squarely in the eye, you will learn, and most importantly, remember. So because I had so many failures, because I made so many mistakes, I tried to face up to my mistakes and learn from them. I encourage you to do the same thing. We are all imperfect vessels, every single one of us. There's not a perfect person sitting amongst this group. A little humility goes a very, very long way. So one of my mantras, as I always say, you want to be a good leader? Take your vanity, take your ego, stick it in your pocket and leave it there. It has no place in leadership. Key characteristics of good leaders. I went on the internet and just to take a look and see which ones I agreed with, all right? And take a quick look at this list. Take a moment and read it. Honest, responsible, integrity, moral courage, knowledgeable, understands the job. You know, you'd sign up for all of this, I suspect. But there's one characteristic not here. And I left it off in particular. Anyone care to guess what that is? what characteristic did I leave off? And it's the absolute most essential one. Yes, ma'am? Louder. Which? Confidence? No. Next.
Guys, in my leadership class, you should know.
Yes, sir.
Vision.
Vision? No. Anyone else? Remember, failure is very, very important. We all learn from it. The most important, say again?
Accountability.
I can't hear you.
Accountability.
Accountability? No. Okay? And then I'm going to have to hand it to you. Here it is. Empathy. Empathy. If you lack empathy, you cannot be a good leader. If you are pathological, if you are neurotic, if you are sociopathic, if you fall outside the bell curve's definition of normalcy for empathy, you cannot be a good leader. Full stop. It's a physical, intellectual, emotional impossibility. So if you are within the normal bandwidth of what we consider empathic, meaning, and the other word for that is compassion. If compassion is part of your physical makeup, what's another word? Kindness. Wow. No one told me this when I was a young sergeant. Okay, when I was a young sergeant, I was supposed to stand up and bark orders at people. Does that work? Yeah, it'll work in the short term. Does it work in the long term? I was a failure. And I remained a failure for many years because I could not get beyond my own ego. I could not get beyond my vanity and the little bubble that I created for myself and my self-image. So, if you remember nothing else from this presentation, remember that, and interestingly, it's the most important characteristic for a leader, but it's also the most critically important for a human being. Empathy, compassion, kindness. You remember these words, put them in your forebrain, and keep them there. You'll be not only a better leader, you'll be a better person. Now, what's the key action? One of the things that, if any of you ever go on my website, the address is down there, tap on Bob's Laws on the website. And what you'll find is 26 of my satirically named Bob's Laws. Those things I think I have learned after living in 16 different countries and visiting another 59. That's a lot of countries. That's a lot of cultures. That's a lot of different people. That is a color palette, a culture palette, okay, a gender palette that I've not met outside the United Nations. I've literally had to deal successfully with people from multiple cultures within a United Nations context without insulting anyone. You think this face wins me points anywhere in the third world? You think I can go to Africa with this face? You have to win friends and influence people, and the currency in that is always the same. Kindness, compassion, and respect. Ooh. These are all human emotions, human qualities, human characteristics. I don't care how you characterize them. They're massively important. And we're going to get to that why. I mentioned that sacrifice is meaning. And it is. All meaning in your life is given through the process of sacrifice. So, I've known lots and lots of rich people over the years. Many of them have no meaning in their lives. They live comfortable lives. And they live meaningless lives. Without purpose, without meaning. And many of them are sorry creatures indeed. So if you're in business and you're looking to make big bucks, fine. But don't think that's going to make you happy. Don't think for an instant that that's going to buy you contentment. It won't, it can't, it never will. So remember this, sacrifice equals meaning. And very often, it's worth it. I already hit on this one. Only good people can become good leaders. We'll talk quickly about Alexander the Great, Napoleon. We call these guys Frederick the Great. All these great military leaders, for example. All these great military leaders were called great because they killed the most people. Does that define greatness for you? I sure hope not. Now, if you have helped the most people, I think that's great, but strangely enough, it doesn't get you in the history books. I think that's probably bad. Only good people can become good leaders. And these are the two C's. And Summer mentioned this in her opening remarks. This, in the Army, we would stomp our foot like this when something was going to be on the test. Okay? So the sergeant would stomp on it and say, this is going to be on the test, man, so pay attention. Caring equals loyalty. Competence equals respect. Let me talk a little bit about that. When I was chief of the Middle East and North Africa, I had several staff officers and other people working for me, and 16 officers downrange in war-torn Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Libya. It was amazing and frightening and frustrating, and I didn't sleep for 18 months, and my wife kicked me out of our bed and put me on the couch because I was getting phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning. Summer knows all about that. She lived through some of it with me. Leadership is about caring. If you care for your people, the people that you lead, your team, over time, they will become, you will engender, you will earn their loyalty. And tell you what, loyalty must be earned. It's not given. It's not. It's about people. It's about humanity. It's about how we feel about ourselves and others. Caring equals loyalty for a reason. And everything works for you if your people are loyal. However, there's one other component, and that is competence. You have to know your job. Now, we know of lots of people who didn't know their job well. Do you respect them? Nope. I have very little respect for people that have been placed in positions of authority that are incompetent. Now, let's say, for example, you're a leader, and you have won both the respect through competence, you know your job, through respect and caring, and earn their loyalty. If you have the respect and loyalty of your team, they will not permit you to fail. I am every bit as flawed as every other human being in this room, perhaps, in many cases, more so. But people like Summer wouldn't let me fail. My team would never let me fail. And you need to know that there's a human connection that needs to be made here. And if you fail to make that human connection, you will not glean their loyalty. People will show up. They'll do their jobs. They're not going to go at breakneck speed. They're not going to care about you. They're not going to care about the team. And everything is about managing that team. Now, not everybody possesses all those leadership characteristics I talked about earlier. Nobody does. There's nobody perfect. There are no perfect leaders. There are no perfect people. Good management is generally defined by human resources. What are the priorities? What drives human resources priorities in the corporate environment? Maximizing profits or limiting liability? What is the relationship between what I just talked about? Compassion, kindness, competence, okay? And the relationship between that maximizing profits and limiting liability. Anyone see some friction there? Because there's plenty of opportunities for friction there. That's what we're talking about now. You, as the leader, are going to have to find a means by which to thread that needle. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a dean, whether you're a colonel, as I was, being a chief within the United Nations. It doesn't matter what your job is. Leadership is much the same in all environments. However, in the corporate world, there's perhaps more friction. And you need to be cognizant of that. And you need to master what HR is saying, because if you're going to break the rules, and trust me, if you want to be a good leader, you're going to break the rules from time to time. Otherwise, what have you become? You become a management automaton. There are no perfect HR departments either. And in order to gain the loyalty of your team, occasionally you'll have to break the rules, and you better have a good reason for doing it. But if you accept no risk for the people on your team, why should they take any risk for you? Again, back to threading the needle. So, good leaders assume reasonable risks in support of their teams and individual team members. If one of your female team comes in one day, okay, or calls and said her child is desperately ill, I have to take them to the hospital, you are doing a presentation that day, you absolutely needed her, and you have to step in. You are the leader. You bear the responsibility. You bear the burden. She has to go take care of her child. She has to. But I've seen some bosses say, no, you have to be here. And leave a sick child at home. Leadership is also about assuming burdens for others. Have you heard any of this stuff before? This is important. This is the base of the pyramid. It doesn't get any more basic than this. Who deserves credit? Some of this becomes cliche. The most important word in the leader's vocabulary is our. Lose the word I. Lose it. Lose it. Our team needs to do this. Our team needs to do that. Okay? We need to talk about us. We need to talk about the team. Okay? You're both a member and a leader of the team. If you forget you're a member, you got a problem. If you think you're better than everyone on your team, you got a problem. And that's where humility comes from. Absolutely essential as both a leader and a human being. Isn't that interesting? And again, it's cliche. The least important word is I, but we need to say it. What do the best leaders do? They empower their teammates. Full stop. How do you empower your teammates? You encourage them. You encourage them. You tell them that they can do it. You put them in positions of responsibility. You give them meaningful tasks. And then you help them achieve that goal. Again, back to respect, back to kindness, back to compassion, and it always comes back to that circle. It always comes back to the human equation. Remember what I said? Empowering your teammates is everything. Defining success. No, ego, vanity. We all suffer from some degree with ego and vanity. Perhaps those called on to be leaders, it gets especially tough for you. Very often you'll see dilettantes and sycophants, those people that want to curry favor with you by telling you that you're smart, you're handsome, you're powerful. You have all these positive human characteristics because that's how they hope to get ahead. You have to take all that flattery and put it behind you because that's all it is. Focus on what's important, and that's the job. Put your ego in your pocket and leave it there. Nobody has all the answers. And this is one of the other things I found out in the United Nations. Literally, nobody has all the answers. The more minds you get working on a problem, the better chance you're going to have a successful outcome. Full stop. If you're sitting behind your desk making all the key decisions all by yourself, you're going to screw up. You're going to make huge mistakes. that your team could have anticipated for you, but you didn't listen. Failure to listen is failure. Defining success. Don't let, now I'm going to take a step back into graduate school and talk about capitalism just a little bit. How many of you have actually read Das Kapital? I don't see any hands going up. Yeah, I knew you had some. Okay, it was one of the things I had to do. It was really a deep slog. But the bottom line is, Karl Marx gets a bad rap. Okay, he did a great job describing the worst excesses of capitalism. His solution was an absurdity, and he admitted it before his death. But the bottom line is, he described the worst excesses of capitalism. We see some of that becoming evident here in the United States now. We see greed and avarice becoming the golden goose, where everybody wants to go. They define themselves in terms of their material success. If you do that and define yourself in terms of your material success, you'll end up discontented. It's not to be found there. You need to find balance in your life. You need to find balance in family. You need to find balance in friends. You need to find balance in colleagues. You certainly need to find business in your job, whatever that job happens to be. I defined my life in terms of my missions that I had when I was a soldier. I got a lot of missions accomplished. I got a lot of missions accomplished in the UN as well. I broke a lot of crockery, and I destroyed a lot of relationships. When I say I made a lot of mistakes, I mean I made a lot of mistakes. And I hurt people. And looking back at it retrospectively, having gained some small degree of self-awareness now, I regret that, but I can't change it. All I can do now is pass it on to you and say, you don't want my regrets. Please don't do what I did. Take your time, think it through. Put kindness in somewhere in your forelobes and ride that pony. I don't own a house. I don't own a car. This has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with my wife, who's a former academic and a PhD from the University of Wisconsin. I have been smart enough to listen to her. Okay, that's another joke. I didn't used to listen so good. When I started listening to her, my life got better. I got better. Did you know that you can make a choice to be kind? You can make a conscious choice. Even if you're on one of the wings outside the bell curve, sociopaths are very good at mimicking human emotions. But you can also make the choice. You can make the choice today, every day, you wake up and you say, today I'm going to be kind. And then do it. And don't limit your kindness to just your team. Expand your kindness to the security guard, to the janitor, to everybody in your world until it becomes a habit. When it becomes a habit, it's the best possible habit you can make. Now, kindness is also a risk. Friendship is a huge risk because you're not always going to get it back reciprocally. Some people are not going to return your friendship. Some people are not going to return your kindness. Some are going to stab you in the back. Does that mean you stop? It takes enormous courage, personal courage, to do what I'm talking about. Leadership like this, being a good human being, takes courage. To embrace the truth, to look at your fellow human beings and see a reflection of yourself, to understand that without humility, you are lacking. So it's a constant process of self-effacement. Mirror imaging, look at yourself in the mirror, and that's what this is, knowing yourself. If you gain that degree of self-awareness, there's no telling where you can go. Now, you mentioned accountability earlier. I remember, yes, you. You mentioned accountability earlier. You're absolutely right. But it has to do am the only individual in the history of the United Nations to be fired, promoted, fired, and promoted. Historically, it's only happened to me. I'm the only one. I was fired by the Secretary General of the United Nations on the front pages of the New York Times. I've had some unique experiences. I want to pass some of those experiences on for you. They had something that developed called the framework for accountability. And accountability is all about the hammer. So if you're accountable, okay, the hammer comes down on you. And I said, no, we shouldn't call it that. And I sent it, I think Sarah was in the room, I sent a note up to the other Secretary General, I said, we shouldn't call it that. It should be the framework for responsibility. Responsibility is something we all accept, we hope, all good leaders anyway. We accept responsibility for our actions. We accept responsibility for our decisions. We are accountable, but accountability is about a knife to your throat. And responsibility is about me and what I can do better for my team. So that's extraordinarily important. And responsibility is all about moral courage. Moral courage is stand up and say, yeah, I made that decision. I had the help of my team. I made the decision, but I'm responsible. And obviously accountable. You need to remember that. Accept blame and share credit. Your people will notice like that. You don't have to remind anybody. You don't have to tell anybody. Nothing. They'll know. And the best bosses act as a heat shield for their team. So if it's an ass chewing that's coming, the leader walks in, closes the door, takes it, doesn't blame any of his team, and comes back and said, gang, we'll do better next time. Don't worry about it. Go home, kiss your kids, okay? Hug your wife, and tomorrow's a new day. Now, this is a test for you. When I talk about a job descriptions, okay? What immediately comes to mind? What would you fill in there? What kind of job, in your experience, because we all have this experience, fits that job description? Has all these characteristics, or many of them. Don't feel bad, almost nobody gets this. I've given this presentation in Europe, in the United States, almost nobody gets this. So I'll hand it to you. Mom. Most of the mothers I know, even my own, sacrificed for me and our other children every single day of their lives. Bore burdens for us. Now, would every mother make a great CEO? Perhaps not. However, on the human side of the equation, mothers make great leaders because they face. Any of you watch football? Any kind of football, okay? And if you watch any kind of football, you see some of the times the players are down in the field and they notice that they're in camera shot, okay? What do they always say? Hi, Mom! A guy could weigh 350 pounds, okay? He could be a linebacker, he could be a center, and he takes a moment to look at the TV screen and says, hi, Mom. Why? He's got a connection there. Mothers, you can do worse than to take a look at moms and use them to inspire you to be a better leader. I suspect you haven't heard that one before. Leadership truisms. And this goes back to vanity again. Leadership is not a badge of nobility, but a noble calling. Involves self-sacrifice, bearing burdens for others, takes the heat from above without complaint, makes self-awareness a passion. I know that many of you don't know what self-awareness means. I certainly didn't. I read the textbook definition, and I didn't understand it until I gained some degree of self-awareness, and then suddenly the dominoes started to fall, and all of a sudden I started understanding things I never understood before. If you're the leader, you impact everybody. And you need to be cognizant of that fact. You need to choose your words carefully. And you need to go through these leadership traits and make sure that you are living up to your potential. Now, all right, we're good to go. Thought for the Q&A. Here we're talking about corporations. Maximization of profit while avoiding liability. What impact on inclusion and gender issues, for example? And these are major issues everywhere today. One quick mention. As you know, I've lived and worked in some pretty horrible countries. But one of the truisms that came out of it, if you make the lives of women better, they in turn make the lives of everyone around them better. I've seen this play out in multiple countries, multiple continents, multiple cultures, multiple linguistic groups. It plays out over and over and over again. You improve the lives of women, you improve the lives of everybody. Unfortunately, you improve the lives of the men. Generally speaking, they'll go downtown with their buddies, they'll drink up the profits with beer. Okay? I'm sorry to say that, guys, but we can all do a better job. I know you guys are laughing about this, but I've seen it play out over and over and over again. It's true. Okay, time for the Q&A. I'm at your disposal. Go for it. Okay, here we go. Questions, please. Don't be shy. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that you need to be encouraged to be a leader, right? But sometimes that kindness can turn into being perceived as a weakness.
Yes.
And that is, it would be turning into devastation, not leadership.
Yes. This is the risk. That this, when I talk about the burden of leadership, I'm talking about the emotional burden of leadership. It's not about money, it's not about the next promotion, it's not about any of those things. It's about the emotional cost to you of being a leader when someone betrays your trust. And it's going to happen. It is absolutely going to happen. And you've got to be strong enough. That's why leadership requires, what I would do, if you look at this, and I'm not sure where to draw the line. You want leaders to be sensitive, at the same time you want them to be tough. Where do you draw that line? How do you live that life? You have to decide, sometimes you're going to be really tough, sometimes you're going to be really sensitive. You have to choose your moments. Summer is sitting here right now because of me. Let me tell you about a success story. Summer was my administrative assistant in the United Nations. She was a superb administrative assistant. Took great care of me. I had so many administrative problems. I had two administrative assistants, you and Richard. But they both did a great job taking care of me. But she was really, really smart, scary smart. So one day I invited her into my office, slammed the door, sat her down, and said, "What the hell are you doing here? Summer, what the hell are you doing here? If in any fair world," I remember what I said, "in any fair world, I would be working for you. So why are you here working for me as an administrative assistant? You need to go home, talk with Mustafa, her husband, and figure out what you want to do with the rest of your life, because you're too good to spend the rest of your life as an administrative assistant." And look where she sits now. That's success for me. It wasn't about getting a promotion, and it wasn't about making more money. It was about helping people reach their goals, or recognizing them and their superior performance and their superior abilities and their superior potential, and helping them achieve their goals. I feel better about what happened with her than every promotion I ever got. I would hasten to add that if you want to be that kind of leader, please do. Please do. It's about helping people. It's about helping people reach their goals. It's about helping people with their families, with their husbands, being an advisor, being a confidant. The roles you have to play as a good leader are in plenitude. It's a deluge. It's a cornucopia. It's how can you be so many things to so many people simultaneously, and yet the best leaders are, or aspire to be. Did I answer your question? So have I. So, particularly in the United Nations, and yes, yes, sir. Loud enough. Remember, I don't hear so good.
So back to what you said like empathy is the most important trait
Yes.
for a leader. Do you really believe that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's fact. It's a fact. It's not supposition. Okay, we're talking about, I've been doing this sort of thing for half a century. I'm the oldest man in this room. I'm 71 years old. Okay? I've had experiences most people will never have and don't want to have. Trust me, I've seen it play out over and over and over again. If you read the literature, if you go to the academic literature, you'll find it there too. Although, dependent upon if it's business literature, it's going to have a different slant. So if you're reading Barron's, it's going to be something entirely different. But in order to be a good leader, the base of that pyramid is empathy. If you have it, you're capable of being a good leader. If you don't, you can't and you won't. You could end up being as successful monetarily as Elon Musk. Yeah, you may end up being a billionaire. But trust me, you're not going to find contentment. You're not going to find happiness there. Money will not cushion the blow. You can drive I know a guy that owns McLarens and Porsches, and he buys and sells companies, okay? And he's looking to take his life in a different direction. Yes, ma'am.
I think that this is a mistake that is often made in the field of business, is that people confuse the term management with leadership, and those two are not the same. And I think oftentimes the idea of a leader is someone who's in command and control, which I disagree with, because I think it's really important, as you said, to be empathetic. And I think the chief job of that leader is to help support the people who report to that person and to enable their success.
Yes.
That's how you become more successful.
Yes, I agree with everything you just said. Everything you just
What are
said.
your thoughts around that idea of management versus leadership?
Actually, that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up, because you remember that in HR circles, okay, HR is all about limiting liability while maximizing profits. Is there a tension between that and empathic leadership? Absolutely. You have to find the wherewithal within yourself to thread that needle. But it often involves taking risks. This is what I mentioned earlier. If you're unwilling to take a risk for your subordinates, they're unwilling to take a risk for you. And that means sometimes violating the rules. And if you have a boss who's supportive, I did. I had a boss that was supportive. He allowed me to violate rules when there were higher priorities, meaning moral or ethical priorities. Does HR base everything they do on morality and ethics? No. It's back to the maximization of profit and limiting liability. So, lawyers have a lot to do with that. Are lawyers moral? No. Are they ethical? Within their career field, yes. But what does morality have to do with that? Not a damn thing. Yes, ma'am. So I agree with every point you made. Yes, ma'am. Oh, there's no way. Summer, you have to help me.
I wanted to circle back on your comment about ego. So most of the leaders that we see today are high confidence and they attract their followers through their confidence. So what's the difference? Don't want to have egos to
Okay, I didn't hear a word you said. Summer, you want to? John?
You have to have ego to be able to lead.
Yes, absolutely. But you have to have a grip on your ego. You want to be self-confident. Okay, I am, if everyone tells me, I'm massively self-confident. I stand in front of groups like this over and over and over again on multiple continents. I've talked to lots of different people, lots of different ways. I am self-confident. Now, inside, okay, I always get jitters before I make a presentation. Okay, I worry about whether I'm going to say the right thing, the right way. I worry about that I might give offense to somebody unintentionally in the group. And you'll find that in leadership roles, you'll find yourself standing in front of groups. And that means that you have to have a strong enough ego in order to do that, but you need to keep your ego and your vanity under control, which is why I always say, take your ego, stick it in your pocket, leave it there. Ego is not beneficial in and of itself to your role as a leader. In fact, it's detrimental. So and that's why I tell everybody, a little humility goes a very, very long way. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
You talked about risk and sacrifice. What
Yes.
were the hardest decisions you had to make as a leader?
Usually, the hardest decision I made as a leader was in the wake of the suicide bombing in Baghdad. As I mentioned earlier, 22 people died in that blast. Over 150 were wounded, including my wife. She was doing a consultancy for the World Food Program. So, and I was the chief of security for the United Nations in Iraq. So I was surrounded with a scene you can't imagine, hopefully, and lots of dead people and lots of people who were wounded. And the toughest decision I ever had to make was I knew that New York was immediately going to demand an accounting of who was hurt, who had been killed, their countries and their families would be after them. And that responsibility was going to fall to me. But if I slowed the process, there's 1 hour, what we call the golden hour in the military, to save a life. Stabilize that individual if they're bleeding out badly, and get them to competent medical authority to save their lives. I could have assigned one of my officers to the role of monitoring that process, and ultimately decided in a nanosecond not to do it, because if I slowed the process, somebody might die as a consequence. Now, the American Army, who provided all the medics that evacuated our people, would have respected my authority. But the fact is that I knew that I didn't want to risk any of their lives in order to meet a bureaucratic administrative requirement that no doubt served friends and families and countries. But I said, better that they wait, and then they find out in a day that they're alive, they've been treated successfully, and they're still breathing. That was the toughest decision I ever had to make, okay? And I took a lot of heat for it in New York. You know how New York is, okay? How dare you make such a decision? I was brought on the carpet like that 3 or 4 times. Every time I looked at him and said, I'm sorry, if I had to make that decision all over again, I would make exactly the same decision. Okay? Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
When you said you hurt people in the past, when did you realize that you had to change?
Summer?
When you said you hurt people in the past, when did you realize that you had to change?
I think it happened gradually, but I think my wife was most helpful. After going through several traumatic events, this was just one of the traumatic events I went through. I also had some personal tragedies that I don't need to discuss in this forum, but tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy, and I was suffering emotionally and mentally, and I was not a very good husband. And I started in self-destructive behaviors, and I focused wholly, completely, and utterly on my job, which is terrific for getting the job done, but really bad for living a balanced life. And my wife came to me one day, and my wife told me, she said, look, you need to sit down, you need to talk to a professional. So I actually listened to her, something I hadn't always done, and I went to see a therapist. And the therapist, after 3 different therapists, one in Egypt, one in Thailand, and another in Washington, D.C., suggested that I had a skill set, because I'm a writer, that I might consider writing a book. And that he suggested that might be therapeutic. He was right. It took me 3 years to write the book. It was a difficult process to go through, but at the end, I had achieved some degree of self-awareness. I had shed some of the emotions that were damaging, the grief that I felt, the pain that I felt. It was a kind of PTSD, but I can't explain it all to you. There was too much, and I wouldn't want to explain it to you in a way that you truly understood, because there's so much pain associated with it, okay? I managed to come out the far end, write the book. It was therapeutic. I can talk about it now. I can smile. This is something, Summer knew me at a time when I wasn't doing much smiling. Did I answer your question? Okay, very good. Anyone else?
When you
If not,
Yes.
thank you very so much for your time.
Final question, if there's any final question, I don't know, but there's one more final question here.
Yes, please, please.
I'd like to know who you look up to as an ideal leader and why.
My personal hero was always Colin Powell. Colin Powell. He made one major political mistake based in loyalty as a former soldier. But the bottom line is Colin Powell, in many ways, embodied all the lessons that I talked about here today. Colin Powell had them. He was that kind of guy, and he was inspirational. The other one was Nick Rowe, who spent 5 years as a prisoner of the Vietnamese during the Vietnam War, managed to escape and was rescued. And I got to tell you, a guy that spent 5 years as a prisoner with daily tortures, it transforms you, and it transformed him in a very positive way. He was a great man. So those two. Thank you.
One final comment about two things that Bob just mentioned, and just to, you asked him if he believes in empathy and what he says. I just want to share that I was 9 months pregnant, and the UN gives me 2 weeks ahead of time to just go home and relax before delivery, and he kept saying, go home, you have to relax, and I didn't accept, and I was at work until the day of my delivery. I went home at night, my water broke, and I went to the hospital, which means really when you have this kind of care for your team would, your care would be mutual, and you would really do what you need to do when you have to do. And the second thing is about empowerment. So you just mentioned, Bob did give us, at least for me, he gave me way more jobs and responsibilities than my job needed, and I kept growing and growing at the UN and outside of the UN. So I'm personally grateful for that, and I'm very honored to still consider myself friend to Bob, and he is a mentor, and he just recently, even last year, I decided to publish my first journalistic article after publishing several academic ones, and it goes without saying that he walked me through the process, edited really tough, in a tough way, my piece, which ended up being published in the Geneva Journal. So thank you, Bob, for everything, and thank you for coming here, and that was a great talk. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.